Alright, welcome to our second lecture about FRQs. I'm going to talk a little bit about deconstructing them. I stole the slides from a guy named Ken Keller, and I am, of course, Miss Ball, and I'll be your host for the lecture. So, some basic baseline information about focused or constructed or free response questions. First of all, that there's going to be 3 of them on the AP Human Geography exam, and that each question is designed to elicit your geographic knowledge and see how well you can apply that knowledge. So in other words, it's not just enough to be able to spit things back, but you've also got to be able to look at it and say, here's how I'd use it in a given situation. Each question is going to is going to try and challenge you on a different topic. And each question is going to look for you to demonstrate different skills. We're in 3 different topics and at least 3 different sets of skills. Okay. Generally speaking, these questions are written with the idea to test your ability to do specific things, right? To use specific skills. And again, we went through these with the other lecture, but things you got to know. You got to know the definitions, you got to know the terminology, you got to know the content. All right, all that stuff that we've been learning all year, you got to know it. At a minimum, you're going to be asked to use basic terminology, right? But the reality is, you want to get the better scores, you gotta have depth, and you got to be able to apply and provide examples when you're answering these things. Okay? You need to be able to connect your geography knowledge to real-world situations and say, here's how it applies when we're looking at this or that scenario. Okay? And most importantly, you need to be able to critically think, which is to say, take difficult concepts, explain them, and then pull information which is not necessarily in the question and develop that information. Right? And these are things where you're going to pull together and kind of string together information you've learned from 3, 4, 5, or even more chapters in your geography text, right? A great example of something that might require you to think critically if we were thinking about a topic would be, for example, the demographic transition model. You learned about it in population, you learned about it in economic development, you learned about it in culture and talk about gender and identity and things like that. You learned about it when we talked about agriculture, right? So you might need to analyze that model, you might need to explain that model, and what does it mean in different parts of the model for different types of people or in different areas of the world. That's what we mean when we say thinking critically, right? Definitely do not dump everything you know onto a piece of paper, okay? In other words, be a little bit selective, okay? This is not something where you're trying to throw as many things at the wall as you can and see what sticks, because frankly, you won't get points for doing that. Okay. Remember that you need to try and integrate some of the geographic themes and ideas into your response. For example, you might use a point from several different units of study in your answer. Answer the question in the format that it's written. So, for example, if the question is 3 parts which are labeled A, B, and C, you need to answer it labeling A, B, and C. It doesn't necessarily need to be in order, but you need to answer it in A, B, and C. Sometimes you can explain in a sentence or 2, and it's okay to be short. Don't belabor points, but you need to be thorough and you need to be complete. Okay, so if it says to explain or to define something, 1 or 2 sentences is okay. That's an appropriate length. Be direct and use evidence when you're making an argument. And make sure that you're using your geography vocabulary wherever it's relevant. Okay, so if you've got a geography word that fits, use it. Don't use the other words. You can't think of the geography word, use the other words. But as best you can, you should always use your geography vocabulary in order to answer these questions. Okay. So Mr. Keller recommends that you not rewrite the question in your response, which is contrary to other advice I've received. So do it or don't do it. But do absolutely make sure you answer what the question asks. This is the #1 problem kids have. Answer what you're asked. Okay. You don't need to worry about thesis statements, introductions, conclusions. Do not use bullet points in your answers. Use sentences. Sentences, and complete thoughts. Outlining or pre-writing is your friend, and we've been doing this all year, right? In a few different ways, most recently using that graphic organizer that asks you to identify what are the verbs, to estimate points, to identify what do you need to know, and then what do you already know about it. As you're writing, I know you guys feel like you don't have enough time to do the pre-write thing, but here's the thing, during the mock exam, here's what happened. Most kids answered 3 questions in about 20 or 30 minutes, and then they had their heads down for 20 and 30 minutes. That means they had time to pre-write. Okay? Spend a few minutes. You don't want to spend a ton of time. You don't have a ton of time. But certainly 3 to 5 minutes outlining the main points for your answer, jotting down some ideas. Here's what I already know. Right? Will absolutely help you out. When you go to write your actual response, then you've got a baseline. You kind of know what's the important information and it's a little bit of a roadmap for you as you're trying to create this response to this essay, and it'll help calm you down. And that pre-write, that's the spot where you can do some of the brain dumping, right? Because you can always go through and cross out ideas that you decide are not necessarily relevant. In the past, students who create outlines have told me, it's been very successful. It's really helped them to be successful on the exam, thinking through the questions thoroughly. And again, this is something we've done throughout the course of the year. You know, at the end of the day, really, this is a big strategy to help you organize your thoughts so that you're not writing too long or not writing too short, because you know what the main points are, right? It'll help you manage your time. He recommends, and I think this is not a bad idea either, is that you answer the question you think is the easiest first, and then go on to the next easiest, etc. In other words, pre-read all of the questions, right? And maybe go through and do your pre-writing for all of the questions. But what this does is it serves 2 real purposes. One, you pick up the easy points. Okay, so you get the easy points because you've got time to write them and get them thought out. But 2 means that you can, after you've done that, now you've got the extra time to think about, write, respond to that hardest prompt. Okay. At the end of the day, nobody's going to know if you write question 3, question 1, and then question 2, or question 2, then 3, then 1. Right? Doesn't really matter as long as they're written in your answer booklet. Nobody cares what order you're writing them in. They're just going to give you 75 minutes and say go. Do be as neat as possible when writing your responses. We understand you're under a time crunch, but at the same time, the people reading these responses are not going to be me, who is used to reading your hieroglyphics and your chicken scratch in your response, right? In roughly the same idea, skip a line between each line of your answer. It's a courtesy to the reader, and white space helps people distinguish where breaks are meant to be, right? You'll have plenty of space in your answer booklet, and you can go back in and add information if you need to at the end. Another big idea is Unit 1, right? Its nature's geographic nature and perspectives will never appear on its own. It doesn't comprise that much of the test in general, but it is absolutely embedded in those FRQ exams, those ideas from Unit 1. So they might ask you about distance decay or time-space compression, right? They might ask you a little bit something about various geographic regions. So they're embedded in the questions, but it doesn't appear on its own. So the FRQ questions content-wise are going to come from the other 6 units we've studied. Conceptually, you might very well be asked how you will probably be asked how those concepts from Unit 1 apply to some of those ideas and concepts and content we learned in the other FRQs. There's all kinds of ways to try and predict what are the content on the FRQs this year. One of the popular ones I've seen a lot of people predicting, for example, is that there will be something about women in agriculture. So just something to think about, and we'll go through and do some of that ourselves later this week. But that's really kind of our summary, talking about writing FRQs. I gave you a packet earlier this year that talked about how to do it. That gave you verb lists and topics from previous years and things like that. I gave it to you for a semester. If you don't have it, if you need a new copy, by all means, please feel free to ask. You should have picked up a handout today that gave you some of the key operator terms, the verbs, and some definitions for those. Look it over, make sure that you know what those mean, because you need to be able to write in the way they're asking you to write. And lastly, if you're really struggling with these, what I'd strongly recommend you do is write some. So I've posted up some on the Google Classroom for you to see and to try and write. And then I also posted up the grading rubric so that you could, after you write them, score your own paper. What did you do? What did you not do? How well did you do it? Where do you feel like you did something halfway? These are important things for you to know to help you pick up and do this better. It's also important when you do that that you time yourself, so you get used to the timing aspect. Okay? Use your resources, don't use your resources, but I think what you'll find if you try it using your resources is that it takes significantly longer and you're better off trying it without. If you have any questions, if you need any more hints or tips, I'd invite you to come in and see me and ask about them, and I will see you the next time we meet.